Our last speaker is Sean Morley, and he is an ultra endurance and ultra nice waterman. Sean is originally from England. In 2014, Sean achieved his childhood dream of completing the first solo circumnavigation of the UK and Ireland by sea kayak, the first ever to include all of the inhabited islands. The 4,500-mile expedition took 183 days and is the longest kayak journey ever undertaken in British waters. In 2008, he achieved the Vancouver Island Record circumnavigation. Sean Morley lives in Fairfax with his wife Gina and 2 kids and can be found paddling and surfing the open coast in a kayak or on a paddleboard. Please give it up for our last speaker, Sean.
Let's wake you up.
Let's turn this on. So this is quite a feat of endurance for you guys. So I'm not going to be at all offended if anybody needs to leave either now or during my 20-minute presentation, and I will try and keep it to 20 minutes. So my talk has nothing to do with surfing, but it's my passion, so I thought I'd throw up a slide of surfing. But I guess surfing is paddling in circles, and that's what I've been doing for 40 years of my life, I guess. I started kayaking at the age of 10 with the Boy Scouts, and I lived on the coast of Cornwall, which is in southwest England. You can tell from the strange accent, I'm British and American citizen now. But I was always curious about when I was paddling along the coast, what was around the next corner. It occurred to me living on an island that if you keep going around the next corner, eventually you'll come back to where you started. And so really from the age of 12, 13, I had this idea of just going around the next corner until I came back from the other direction. I started doing a lot of kayak racing with the Boy Scouts. We were a very active troop. And one of the things that we did was to do this race called the Divisors to Westminster canoe race. Canoeing and kayaking kind of means the same thing in the UK. We would do the race in kayaks, either in a tandem or a single kayak. And I've done that race 5 or 6 times now, I think. But it was a really good sort of grounding into endurance paddling. I did it. The first time I did it, I was 15 years old. That's Big Ben, in the city of London. I cried most of the way on that race. As a junior, you do it over 4 days, and they were 4 pretty miserable days, I've got to tell you. But I must have enjoyed it in some way because I kept doing it. I even won it a couple of times, I think. I did a lot of kayak racing. So just to tell you, I am by no means a natural athlete. My son, who's 8 years old, has way more talent now than I've ever had. I played team sports, but I really wasn't very good at them. I was a very average runner. But when I found kayaking, it was something that I wasn't necessarily particularly good at it, but I really loved it, and I've loved it. I've had a love affair with it ever since. So talking about this sort of how do you become an extreme athlete or an endurance athlete? For me, it was about having a passion for something, and even if you don't have a lot of natural talent, if you're passionate about it and you have enough determination, you can get really good at anything just by putting the time in. And so I would paddle before school. I would cycle 6 miles to the river, paddle for an hour before school, cycle 6 miles to school, fall asleep in class, and then train again in the evening. I was lucky enough. I had great coaches as a junior and a senior, and I managed to sort of stay pretty focused until I got to college, and then I lost my way a little bit. I for sure had a dream of going to the Olympics, and you can see that that's why. I did not go to the Olympics. But I did manage to race for Great Britain for a few years, doing some fun racing. In lots of different places, but I was constantly distracted by the ocean and by surfing, and wave ski was for sure my passion, as well as racing and paddling on the ocean. I didn't really start sea kayaking until quite later on, when a friend of mine introduced me to one of the first sort of high performance sea kayaks. And that is the Curtin Innoc that I'm using there. And I set myself a challenge of paddling around the Devon and Cornwall Peninsula, which is a very beautiful part of England. By this time, I was a police officer in the Devon and Cornwall Constabulary, and so it appealed to me to paddle around the force area. And I raised money for a charity. But I was certainly very interested in how far I could paddle each day and then how long I could maintain that rhythm. With in the back of my mind that I might want to do a trip around the whole of Great Britain. And like all challenges, I guess, it starts by reading a book. And this book by Bill Taylor basically describes a team that paddled around the UK and Ireland back in 1986. And in the last paragraph of the book, he kind of throws down the gauntlet and says, okay, who's going to do it solo? And who's going to do it including all the inhabited islands? And when I read that book around sort of 1995, I thought, that's going to be me. And I just prayed that nobody did it before. I had to get myself in a financial situation, with my job, that I could take 6 months off to do it. So I started out by doing the Devon and Cornwall Peninsula. Then I did a long crossing with a couple of friends of the Irish Sea. And then I did a trip around the north of Britain, around the north of Scotland with a good friend of mine, Ian Wilson. And all the time, these trips, they weren't really vacations. They were very much, how far can we go in per day. And so I'm going to try and use this laser. Yeah. So, having done a trip down here around Devon and Cornwall, I did the crossing of the Irish Sea, and then I did a trip around the north of Scotland here. I felt like I had enough experience to have a crack at what had been a dream for a long time, which was a solo circumnavigation of the UK and Ireland and all the inhabited islands. So just a quick geography lesson for those that aren't familiar with the UK. So we've got England down here, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Southern Ireland. But then you also have, a bunch of islands. Shetland Islands, Orkney, the Western Isles, down here are the Isles of Scilly, and then lots of other islands dotted around. So when you add all those together, it ends up being quite a long way. And I'd also hoped to go around these islands down here, which actually look like they're part of France, but they're actually part of the British Isles, the Channel Islands, the original Channel Islands. So that was the goal, to try and do the whole of the British Isles in one journey. Oh, there we go. I lived down here in right down on the tip of Cornwall, down here. And so it was kind of natural for me to start at a place called Falmouth. And a lot of folks would ask me, why do you want to do this? And so Ranulph Fiennes, if you don't know, was one of our famous polar explorers. Did a lot of did the Trans-Globe expedition, crossed Antarctica, and a bunch of different stuff. But yeah, really, if you need to ask that question, then you're probably not going to understand why anybody wants to do such a journey. I had a couple of goals to raise money for a couple of charities, one being the RNLI, the Royal National Lifeboat Institute. And this one, it was a bit self-serving, really. It's a bit like an insurance policy, If I take care of them, maybe they'll take care of me if I need help. But also logistically, I knew the journey was going to take 6 months. I knew I couldn't carry 6 months worth of food in a kayak. So I boxed up 6 months worth of food along with the charts and maps that I needed and sent them out to the lifeboat stations. And they helped with that, with the logistics. And it worked really well. I could pull into a lifeboat station, open my box and have another 2 weeks worth of food. It was great. I could also, when I visited the lifeboat station, I could also get a ton of really useful information about the coastline and the weather and all that sort of stuff. I could recharge my batteries, my laptop, and all that sort of stuff. So it worked really well. I also raised money for the Marine Conservation Society. And if you spend any time on the ocean, you know the harm that we're doing to the ocean, the marine environment. So this was just a little way of putting something back. And actually, I raised about $10,000 for each charity. £10,000 for each charity. But what's been really nice is a bunch of different expeditions subsequently have raised money for the Marine Conservation Society. So I kind of sowed a seed that grew, which was great. So I started from Falmouth in April, and really this was not a race against the clock. It was a race against myself and against the calendar. I'm paddling the coastline of an island in the North Atlantic, and it's pretty stormy. Certainly, the summer months you can get away with it. Winter, you've almost got no chance. So I needed to finish by the end of September. This gives you some idea of the isolation of paddling solo. I wasn't crossing an ocean, that's for sure. And people have in single kayaks. They've crossed it. There's 2 guys that have crossed the Atlantic Ocean in a kayak. Imagine that. But for me, it was definitely a challenge being on my own. But the UK is inhabited. It's quite well populated, so I was able to stop and speak to folks and, like I say, visit the lifeboat stations and get lots of good information. One of my first challenges was to get out to the Isles of Scilly, which are down here off the tip of the coast of Cornwall. So here's, you may have heard of Land's End, and these are 28 miles out. There's this beautiful archipelago of islands, and they look like this. And I was blessed with perfect conditions, bearing in mind this is April, and I got to paddle around the islands in just idyllic conditions. Back to the mainland, one of the things I was curious about was meeting all the fishermen and then seeing the different designs. I'm a bit of a nerd like this, but I was interested in seeing the different designs of fishing boats as I worked my way around the coastline. This was my old home port, if you like, of Hale, and you can see St Ives Bay, really beautiful. So heading up the north coast of Great Britain now, north coast of Cornwall, and then crossing to Wales. One of the challenges that you have paddling around the British Isles is that there's a lot of tide. Down in Cornwall, the tidal range is about 12 feet. Up here in the Bristol Channel, actually at Avonmouth, it's one of the highest tide ranges in the world, of about 52 feet. So So there's about 12 knots of tide that runs around the island of Lundy here. And even out mid-channel, it's still flowing at 4 or 5 knots. And so it takes a bit of planning. The navigational side of things, it was a 6-month journey, but if you ask my ex-wife, I was gone for at least a year in terms of my mind was planning this trip for long before I actually left. This is the beautiful island of Lundy out in the Bristol Channel. Just giving you a little bit of a flavour of the British Isles. Extremely beautiful. Especially the west coast. The west coast is just magic. This is up on the northwest Wales. That's Cadaridris, Snowdonia up here. So I'm working my way up here, out to the Llyn Peninsula. A lot of people ask why I didn't just cross. I'd already done this crossing in the past, but I wanted to visit as many islands as I could. So there's Anglesey and the Isle of Man. So I decided to come all the way up and then cross and then come back all the way, just to make it a little more difficult. This is in the mouth of the River Dee, Liverpool Bay. And as I say, the tide goes out a long way. This is looking across the Solway Firth to Scotland. Of course, I had to paddle around Ireland first before I could go to Scotland. So it was kind of frustrating being able to see it, but had Ireland to go around first. So yeah, I crossed over to Ardglass up here and then came south down the east coast of Ireland, which is okay. Dublin Bay, I paddled straight across, but once you get down to the south coast of Ireland, then you start to see the wildlife and these little guys. Lots of puffins and these big fish. He's a basking shark, which are filter feeders, kind of small versions of whale shark, if you like. They just cruise along, but still kind of intimidating when you're out there on your own. This is the Fastnet Rock, Fastnet Lighthouse. Kind of a sad story. A lot of Irish immigrants, they would leave Ireland, heading over to the east coast of North America. And the last thing that they would see would be Fastnet Rock. So it was known as the Teardrop of Ireland. Beautiful lighthouse there. People ask me what my favorite part of the coastline was, and it would be a toss-up between the west coast of Ireland and the west coast of Scotland. Both are just absolutely remarkable. This is Antioracht, which is off one of the Blasket Islands. Just absolutely incredible. Almost like something out of Lord of the Rings. And certainly pretty isolated. You're definitely on your own out there. And yeah, as you go around, the designs of the fishing boats change, and these are currachs on the west coast of Ireland. Not much bigger than my kayak, really. And here the language is, they speak Gaelic as their first language. Very few people actually speak English, so you feel like you're in a foreign land. These are the cliffs of Moher. Just stunning. And some of the sea cliffs were just staggering. These cliffs are only, I think these are only 360 feet, something like that. The highest sea cliffs that I paddled under were over 1,200 feet.
Wow.
So lots of beautiful days. Of course, you don't tend to take pictures when it's rainy and windy and miserable. But yeah, lots of. This is Connemara. This is on Achill Island, and I would listen to the radio a lot to just take my mind off things, the solitude and whatever, and listen to the shipping forecast, of course. And yeah, there's little sheep listening to my radio, seeing what food there's to eat. This guy was really interesting. So Achill Island was a center for the basking shark fishing industry, as it was. And he, back in the day, he was a young man, in his 15, 16 years old, and he was telling me how they would catch 50 or 60 basking shark a day. The basking shark basically follow the Gulf Stream up the west coast of Ireland, and they swim into this sort of natural cove of Achill Island, and they would just trap them, harpoon them, bring them in, boil them down for their blubber and their oil, mostly used in the cosmetics industry. Industry was owned, the businesses were owned by the English. Once again, the English exploiting the Irish and Ireland's resources, and within 5 to 10 years, the industry collapsed because there were no more basking sharks. But thankfully, the number of basking shark have now recovered quite healthy. Lots of surf launches and landings on the west coast. You're very much on the Atlantic edge, so having to be really smart. My boat is fully laden. It's extremely heavy. I can't lift it. I can only drag it. So I have to be really sensible about the size of surf that I can launch through. Whipping around the north coast of Ireland, and then crossing the North Channel over to the Mull of Kintyre and Scotland. Again, just massive tides flowing through here. You have to be really, really smart about your planning. I remember seeing a naval ship right out in the middle, and anytime I saw a significant vessel, I was keeping the Coast Guard informed of my journey the whole way around, checking in with them every morning, every evening, and then if I saw a boat, I would radio and say, hey, just let them know I'm safe and sound. And I could see this Navy ship maybe half a mile away. They couldn't see me. And it was a little eye-opening. Even the Royal Navy couldn't find me out there. So I hit the coast of Scotland on a windy day in Machrihanish. One of the great things about the coast of Britain is there's a pub in pretty much every port. So whilst it was a solo trip, it wasn't like Jules's trip or Cyril is where I was carrying all my food with me. I visited every pub I could. And if you read my blog, you would think, and somebody did mention, it sounds like it's the longest pub crawl in. So the west coast of Scotland is just incredible with a number of islands, and of course I had to. My goal was to try and sort of draw a circle outside of everything. Off the west coast of Scotland, you've got campsites to yourself. I did bump into a sailing boat, took a picture of me, which was nice. This is Ardnamurchan, and the small isles of Muck, Egg, and Rum, which just. If you want to go sea kayaking in the British Isles, just that journey itself around the small isles is just absolutely incredible. One of the hottest days of the year. So we're now in July, and one problem with going around all the inhabited islands is that St Kilda is an inhabited island, and it's 41 miles off North Uist. Because I was raising money for the RNLI, I had agreed to get a support boat for some of the longer crossings, and this was one of them. So this is me being filmed from the support boat for the crossing out to St Kilda, and the guy that runs this boat, which is ironically called Sea Trek. This was the only occasion he managed to get out to St Kilda in the whole summer. So I was very, very fortunate to make this crossing. Normally it's just too stormy. But St Kilda is absolutely staggering. It's an archipelago of islands. It's a extinct, highly eroded volcano. And that rock that you can see there is one of the largest gannet colonies in the northern Atlantic. Gannets. It's a large seabird. I don't know if you've seen boobies, sort of a cross between a booby and an albatross. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful birds.
So when you say it's inhabited, who or what lives there? What qualifies as inhabited?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it was kind of a rule that I wrote myself. So if there was a warden that made an occasional visit, I wouldn't deem it as inhabited. But if there were permanent residents, then I would deem it inhabited. And yeah, there's a research station and actually a museum on St Kilda, and it's a fascinating place actually. And these are actually the highest sea cliffs in the British Isles at 1,250 feet. And you can just see me down here. And these are all gannets above me. So everywhere you go in St Kilda, there's a tornado of gannets just spiraling above your head, which is why you wear a hat and you don't look up. You don't look up with your mouth open. I think, Cyril, you mentioned about the pleasure of the seabirds, and really, you're on your own out there, and the seabirds become your friends. Which is kind of sad.
The museum? Were you just...
Yeah, so it used to be inhabited. It's a long time since I've done this presentation, but I think that in the 1930s, they finally evacuated the last residents from St Kilda by their request. The whole of the Western Isles of Scotland were, successfully farmed and crofted for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, possibly. I don't know. But with the sort of influence of civilization, they began to realize that actually life was, in theory, much better on the mainland. And slowly, one by one, they would ask to be, for their village to be removed to the mainland. The tragedy is that once they got moved to the mainland, more often than not, they all died because of tuberculosis and other diseases that they hadn't built up an immunity to. And that the inhabitants of St Kilda were promised a village of their own on the mainland, and the government reneged and split them all up. And the history was pretty much lost. It's quite a tragic tale.
When did that happen? When was it?
I think it was the 1930s. Yeah.
So
I might be
go
wrong.
Go out there and visit?
They did, yeah. So you can take a tour boat. Murray goes out in this fast rib, big, powerful, rigid inflatable. But you can also take a sailboat out there. I don't know if any cruise ships go, but you can get there if you're determined enough.
Sea kayak.
Or you can paddle, yeah. And I certainly wasn't the first to paddle out there. People have paddled out there before. I think I might have been the first to do it solo. I'm not sure, but I had a support boat, so it's not really solo. Anyway, that's looking back to the mainland. 41 miles back to, when I say the mainland, the Western Isles. So this is the north of Scotland now. Cape Wrath, the Orkneys, John O'Groats, just here, Orkney Islands, and the Shetlands. Just to give you an idea of the scale, it's 300 miles from the north of Scotland up to the north of Shetland. This is just around the corner from Cape Wrath. These sea cliffs here are over 900 feet. Moving to the Orkney Isles, the Pentland Firth here, 18 knots of tide flows through here. So got to get your planning right for sure. One of the beauties of going to these remote islands was, the people that you meet. And up on North Ronaldsay, I met this family who fed me dinner, and They live. You can see the lighthouse in the background there. Their croft. Young Hamish here. He's probably this is back in 2004. He's a man now. But his favourite sport was rugby. But this is the only family with children on the island. So every Saturday he would fly to the mainland of Orkney so that he could play rugby. The government does subsidise the ferries and the flights to make it affordable for people to live there, because it's seriously remote. So from North Ronaldsay out to Fair Isle, it's about 26, 28 miles, and then another 28 miles over to Sunborough on Shetland. Again, very inconveniently, the current does this, and so it's no help at all.
The area to be avoided, what was that?
That's actually for boats much bigger than me. There's cables, and Fair Isle is a very sensitive, environmentally sensitive area. Orkney and the Shetlands are big oil terminals. They found North Sea oil, so it's actually for big ships to stay away.
Is this sounding in feet or fathom? What is it?
Those are probably in fathoms, would be my guess. Yeah.
What time of year did you get to the Shetlands?
Late July. Yeah. Lots of good weather, and then the next day, bad weather. Very, very changeable. Kind of like living in, Washington State. That sort of, temperature. But Fair Isle is a beautiful little postage stamp of an island in the middle of the North Sea. Very successful community, and they have diesel generators, but most of their electric comes from that single turbine, which gives you an idea of how windy it is. Lots of these guys, Arctic terns. You'll see people walking around with sticks, and it's not to keep them upright, it's to actually fend off the Arctic terns, which will attack you. This is Fuller on the Shetlands. Massive sea cliffs, lots of sea caves, just stunning. Again, Shetland, just a magic place to live if you get the weather. This is Freddie the Frog, and Freddie had been given to me by some dear friends of mine as a little mascot, and Freddie and I were going to paddle around Muckle Flugger, which is the most northerly tip of the British Isles, and this is Freddie looking a little worried. It was actually kind of a big day. But, so the east coast of Great Britain. Am I over my time?
No, it's good. It's Jacko, my friend from Brisbane.
The east coast is very much more of a straight line, thank goodness. And for me, it was definitely a race to get south. Summer was coming towards an end, and I wanted to be done with this. I thought that the east coast would be flat because it's protected from the Atlantic, but actually the North Sea is really quite a choppy sea. The experience was very different. The east coast is a lot more inhabited than the west coast. My dear ex-wife, long-suffering ex-wife, Linda, she actually met me in Orkney and followed me down down the east coast. And so when I got off the water, my tent was up, my dinner was made, which was pretty cool. And I had my dog with me as well. So it turned from being a solo experience to, I was still solo on the water, but I was able to really push out the miles heading south. And she actually didn't see very much of me at all. You'll see lots of pictures of me not wearing a life jacket. Sorry about that. I was working really hard, and wearing a life jacket I found I was just getting too hot. As I came south, the media were very curious about the fact that there was this crazy policeman paddling around the British Isles, and they wanted to interview me all the time, and it was actually really annoying. I would go out of my way to avoid them, but sometimes I would do an interview. I finally turned the corner after one of the biggest, I think the longest day was about 75 miles across the Thames estuary. Turned the corner to the cliffs, the white cliffs of Dover, and all the ferries going to and fro to France. Coming along the south coast, just beautiful in its own way, and finally in September, I completed the journey back in Falmouth, it really was for me really very very pleasurable. I can't tell you, it was something I dreamt about for decades, and so to achieve it was very very gratifying. This was 2004, and it's now 2018, and I'm still talking about it. So, I really encourage you, if you have a dream like this, or if your kids may have a dream like this, to really encourage them, because it's a life changer, without doubt. As I said, I was a policeman. I knew as I was doing this trip, I knew that I was done with the police, that I wanted to figure out a life in paddle sports, and that's what I've done. I didn't realize it was going to involve moving to California, but that's how things roll. It was nice that my kayak ended up in the National Maritime Museum. And then, I met a lady here in California, and that was the result, my daughter Shaybella. And I came out for a surf kayak competition with no other agenda other than to compete, and there you go. So when I came here, it was, what should I do now? And of course, Vancouver Island is just begging to be paddled around. Again, it has all it's somewhat similar to the British Isles in as much as it has that rugged west coast, fairly sort of moderate east coast, lots of tide, so I set myself a challenge to try and beat what was the record at the time, which was, I think, 21 days at the time. Oh no, 19 days at the time. And I tried to do it in 16 days, and I ended up doing it in 17. But it's now been done in 13, so the record keeps coming down. But yeah, if you're looking for a challenge, whether to do the speed record or just to go there and do your own expedition, Vancouver Island is, without doubt, just mind-blowing in terms of beauty.
More than the
The
British
one.
Isles?
Oh yeah, I mean, just even more remote. I mean, the west coast of Scotland is pretty special, but the west coast of, I didn't see a single human being for over 6 days, other than a jet flying in the sky or maybe a boat on the horizon. No other human being for 6 days, and there aren't many places in the world that you can do that. But from Port Hardy around to Tofino, I didn't see another human being. Mostly out of choice, but pretty cool. Killer whales on tap, basically. Where the guidebook says they are, that's where they are. And then, getting even closer to home, just down the coast here is this amazing group of islands, the Channel Islands. And you go out there and it's like no other, it's another world. You've got, I don't know how many millions of people living here that have never even thought about going out there. And it's, you can get a boat out from Ventura. It's a really very special place to go. My goal was to try and paddle around all of them. I failed miserably. I did 6 of the 8. So that challenge is still there, folks, if you want to break a record. All of these 2 you're not allowed to land on, so you have to go out and back. But yeah, the Channel Islands, totally recommend it. Whoops. So yeah, just off the coast, millions of people living in LA, and there are blue whales cruising up and down the coast. And most people don't know or don't even care. It's just amazing. And these things are the size of a jumbo jet. I mean, they're just massive. Anyway, for me now, my paddling is I'm still paddling around in circles, but mostly it's about trying to stay young and have fun. And I get to coach people on the water, which is a great pleasure, and I'd love to help you with any of your paddling goals for sure. Yeah, on that, as Taya said earlier on, I'm on that journey of a lifetime to bring some other human beings in. But any questions?
How old were you?
42? Is that right? No, 40. 40,
When
yeah.
you were on the islands?
Yeah, 40.
You were 40 when you were on?
Yeah, I'm 52 now.
Has anyone else done it on the inhabited?
No, but it's been quite interesting. A bunch of people have been doing the mainland and getting some amazing times, going faster and faster. But nobody's gone for the full circumnavigation again, which is pretty smart because it was actually really hard. I mean, quite often you look back on these things with sort of rose-tinted glasses and think, it really wasn't that bad. I look back on it now and think, I was completely crazy. And I'm amazed I didn't kill myself, to be honest. Yeah.
Hey, Sean, what's the radio show, Royal Naval Forecast? What's the actual name of that show?
The shipping forecast?
The shipping forecast.
The shipping forecast.
And was that what you were listening to?
Absolutely.
Of course.
Every morning, every evening. Actually, so it's at midnight, or 10 to midnight. So I would fall asleep and then wake up to, set my alarm so I could listen to the shipping forecast. Yeah. Sorry, in the back.
So no one's ever done all of your Channel Islands? Is there something specific about those islands that's harder than others?
Well, first you've got to cross the English Channel to get there.
The California ones.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. So the challenge is that you're not allowed to land on 2 of them. On San Nicolas and San Clemente, they're owned by the military or occupied or whatever by the military. I don't see how you can own an island personally. But, so you're not allowed to land on them. So you have to go from Santa Barbara out around San Nicolas and back. And you have to give a margin of, I think it's 3 nautical miles around. So it just ends up being like an 85 nautical mile day, something like that. So that's a really long trip.
Don't they use it for bombing?
Yeah, exactly. So it's a military range. Yeah, so they I guess bomb the island, but also fire missiles from the island. And then San Clemente is the same issue. In theory, you're not allowed to land. And if I was Freya Hofmeister, that wouldn't be a problem because I could just sleep in my kayak. But I'm not Freya Hofmeister, so I need to get out of my kayak at the end of the day. I would love to mention the fact that Freya Hofmeister is this remarkable woman that she's paddled around Australia, she's paddled around South America, and she's currently paddling around North America. And she'll be paddling past San Francisco, sometime in the next couple of months. And Galen, I believe you're hosting her here.
She'll be here on April 23rd, which is another Monday, giving a talk about her circumnavigation of South America.
Wow.
So it'll be in the main galley over there.
She has a Navy follow her the whole way of South America.
Right.
You know,
She had to. She didn't have a choice.
it's like dangerous once you get on land.
Right. But she presented when she paddled around Australia, and it was a remarkable tour. So I totally recommend coming to see that. Yeah.
So Sean, did you get like weathered in for several days?
I did. Yeah, I had. I don't know how many days off the water, but you know, I definitely took either a rest day or a weather day, and I tried to make them the same, you know, when I needed it. Because yeah, otherwise you just grind yourself down to the point where you. And I did injure myself. I actually spent 10 days off the water when I hurt my back, and thankfully I put a disc out. And thankfully managed to. It went back in. But,
So you had good weather around the Shetlands then, I guess. You were there.
not all the time. It's just very changeable. So you know, good days and bad days. Yeah.
Did you ever fall into water?
Not by accident. Yeah. I never capsized by accident. I did lots of rolls to stay cool, but yeah.
So when you went down the east coast,
Yeah.
it looks like, did you pretty much have a light canoe or kayak then?
I did. Yeah.
So
So
you just kind of unloaded
yeah. So
and
Linda was
lighted and
carrying
went for it.
exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that makes total sense.
Yeah.
And then mostly it was a north wind when you had,
You'd think so, wouldn't you?
yeah.
That would be nice.
But you didn't, right? But all over the map,
Yeah.
the winds?
Yeah.
Very
If there's a wind, it's a headwind. You know. It's,
Well, that's
that's,
but there's no predominant kind of wind.
so, I mean, the reason you go clockwise is because, in theory, the prevailing wind is southwesterly, and then on the east coast, you know, you're likely to get easterly winds or southeasterly. So on the east coast, I got a lot of headwinds, but you know, when you have a tailwind, then you can fly. You know, I had a kayak with a rudder, so I could make really good time, but you know, life sucks, and then you get a headwind.
Since you could only drag your boat, did you have the hull reinforced?
No, but I had to fix it a couple of times. Yeah, it was a Kevlar boat, and you know, I would drag it above the reach of the waves, then empty it, carry my stuff up, then carry the boat up, and that's how I hurt my back for sure. Is just carrying the boat on my own. I had a little wheel, you know, set of wheels, but they wouldn't work on rocks or soft sand.